Good evening, everybody. This is quite a group. I was impressed Thursday night with the rehearsals of how many folks I know. And then tonight to come in and see faces of dear friends who have meant so much to me as I've been coming up in the Salvation Army. And now I'm only 4 years away from retirement. Yeah, it's impossible, isn't it? Yeah. My training principal is here. One thing I didn't learn in training that I learned my very first day in my first appointment in Smithfield, North Carolina, is to keep it simple. I did a devotion on a Tuesday night. Had about 16, 17 women in the chapel just prior to Home League. And I was preaching from Romans chapter 6, where Paul says, if you have been planted together in the likeness of his death, you shall be raised together in the likeness of his resurrection. And I thought I would use baptism as an illustration. So I asked the ladies, how many of you have been baptized? And they all raised their hand. I said, they're not Salvationists. I said, how many of you were baptized by full immersion? And nobody raised their hand. I said, well, maybe they were Methodist. How many of you were sprinkled? And nobody raised their hand. And I scratched my head and I said, is there another way to be baptized? And one little lady raised her hand. She said, Lieutenant, I was dunked under the water. I said, how many of y'all were dunked under the water? And they all raised their hand. You can't make stuff up like that. Philippians 1:27, you see it on the screen. Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Well, I'll try to be careful about taking scripture out of context. I did learn that in training. On a first casual reading of this statement from Philippians 1:27, it looks and sounds like very excellent advice, doesn't it? Good encouragement. Whatever happens. Well, let's face it. In life, a lot of things can happen. Good things, bad things. And to apply this statement broadly, without other criteria, it makes perfect sense. Whatever happens, conduct yourself in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Whether your team wins or loses an NFL playoff game, whether your relationship with a particular family member is good or bad, whether your boss respects and appreciates you or not, whether you're financially secure or struggling to make ends meet, whether you get invited to sing a solo in the Songsters or don't even get invited to participate at all. Conduct yourself in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. That's good advice, right? Well, taken in context, this statement really isn't broad. In fact, the Apostle Paul was actually referring to one of two possible scenarios, A or B. What Paul is really saying to the Philippians here is this: whether I, A, live or B, die, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. For you see, previously Paul had shared that he had come to a crossroads. He had to choose which direction he wanted to go. If he went one way, it would surely lead to his death. If he went another way, he would probably live, but he was uncertain which way to go. He didn't know which way to choose. I am torn between the two, he exclaims. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far, but I feel like I still have unfinished business with you, and I need to keep on living. For me, he states, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Either way, live or die, it's a win-win situation. Well, I can imagine that my testimony tonight is not too much different than some of you in here. 7 years ago, January 20th, 2009, I was diagnosed with an incurable illness called myelodysplastic syndrome, or MDS. In layman's terms, my bone marrow had stopped producing healthy blood cells. My prognosis was an average survival of 5.2 years. Doctors at Duke and Chapel Hill confirmed that they could not cure me. Pete, they said, we can treat your symptoms. We can prolong your life. We can improve the quality of your life, but we cannot cure your illness. From January to August, I went through 8 months of failed chemotherapy treatments. I lost my appetite, my strength, my color. I even lost more hair, which I certainly couldn't afford. I also lost about 35 pounds, which I could afford. I was surviving on blood transfusions, receiving about 2 pints of blood every 2 weeks. And then I started having kidney and liver difficulties because of the excess iron in my system from all of the transfusions. Well, I never gave up. I never desired to die. But I knew what the Apostle Paul had been experiencing when he said, to live as Christ and to die as gain. I was willing to accept whichever path God had in store for me. And I was beginning to think that death was imminent. In September 2009, my oncologist recommended that I participate in a new study group using a combination of 2 fairly new chemotherapy treatments in tandem. Revlimid, which was a daily capsule, and Neupogen, which was an injection that I was taking initially twice a week. Within 2 weeks, I could tell the difference. Amazing. I could feel the medicine working. Some patients cursed the painful side effects, but I considered it a blessing of affirmation. Something was happening. Something was working. And from that point on, I never needed another blood transfusion, and I gradually began regaining my strength. One day during this time, I was talking with my divisional commander, Dalton Cunningham. I told Dalton, as soon as I'm able, I want to go back to the field. Of course, he asked me, Pete, why? And my response to him was very sincere. If I'm going to die, I don't want to die on headquarters. That's what I told him. I'd rather be in the trenches on the field. Well, in June of 2010, Kathy and I were appointed to the Raleigh, North Carolina Corps, and these past 6 years have infused me with life and strength. And furthermore, I have resolved that whatever happens, whether we raise more money in the kettles this year than last year, whether we have more attendance in Sunday school and holiness meetings, whether the band plays in tune or at the right tempo, or whether I live or die, I'm going to conduct myself in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. God bless you.